Now, it's time for our series of lightning talks. These are short recorded speeches. They're going to give you an insight into the experiences of different data institutions. Rishi, Thom and Matt, who are our three speakers, recorded these earlier, but they are here today and they are in the chat section. So please feel free to message them or to put any questions for a general conversation in chat. I think that's going to be in the session area on Hopin. Don't forget, if you're using your Chrome browser, you'll get the best experience from Hopin. Without further ado, let me introduce our first lightning talk. This is Thom Townsend, who is from OpenOwnership.
Hello, my name is Thom Townsend and I'm the Executive Director of OpenOwnership. It's great to have the chance to talk with you today and thank you for having me. OpenOwnership is an organisation that campaigns to ensure that we shut down the use and abuse of anonymous companies by mandating that this is properly disclosed to governments, and then that information is freely published, as it is in the UK, much of Europe, and to varying degrees a handful of other countries around the world. For those that don't know, an anonymous company, often called a shell company, is something that can still be created in many countries around the world. And it allows you to participate in the international system of finance and trade and banking, while shielding from view who really benefits from that company, who really owns it. These mechanisms are the primary tool for moving the proceeds of crime, corruption, and, to be blunt, concealing cheating from the wider world. No one really knows the scale of the problem, though, but we do know that around 70% of corruption cases that are brought to trial involve the use of anonymous companies. The Panama Papers leak alone has resulted in the recovery of around $1 billion of stolen assets, but that is just a drop in the ocean. The international system of finance, I would argue, is broken. It's abused, and those people with the power and expertise continue to use this method to cheat the system. It's not all doom and gloom, though. We are making some progress. We ourselves work in around 34 countries. Around 37 countries are fully committed to public registers of company ownership, and a further 51 countries are committed to a partial implementation of that, either in a specific sector or around a particularly high-risk activity like public procurement. So, what kind of data institution is OpenOwnership? I think we're quite hard to pin down, actually. We take a proactive approach to this campaign, and we not only try to tell the story of why this abuse needs to stop through our research and policy work, but also through the development of open data standards and the support to implement them, make sure that countries implementing these reforms to shut down the loophole do it well. It is worth remembering that the creation of this data by governments and indeed companies themselves, and of course it being submitted to a state-run register, is a new thing. Really hasn't been done a great deal before. So we want to both create something and then open it up right from the start. That means our work is often about supporting the creation of really robust legislation to ensure that this can happen. And then the support to create the technical systems to collect, store and publish information on who really owns companies in an effective and sustainable and useful way. In short, we argue that this change must happen, then we get our hands dirty to ensure that it does. And we do this in a few different ways. First and foremost, we set a policy standard. What should and does good look like? We do that through our principles of effective disclosure, which are available on our website. We then, of course, build the data standards to ensure there is a blueprint for doing that data publication well. This is BODS, the Beneficial Ownership Data Standard that's being implemented by a number of governments. But prior to that information being published, we have to ensure that it's collected well. So we are designing the tooling required to do that. And we've been working with organizations like GDS and others to build prototypes of what that collection system could look like, and ensuring that those design patterns are made available for everyone to use. We also then aggregate all available open data on company owners into a global register of beneficial ownership. We currently ingest data from around 10 countries, really those where it's available to be pulled into the register. And we put that into BODS, into the Beneficial Ownership Data Standard. And then we provide some simple tooling to visualize complex corporate structures. We do that not really to become a dominant player in the provision of the data, but to show the thing, to show what happens when you take information about company owners from different countries around the world and you bring it together into one place. What kind of visibility does that give you about complex corporate structures, and show you what can be done with that data when it's available in a good interoperable standard? Behind all of that practical work, though, I see ourselves as an organisation that is primarily concerned with making sure that our global system of finance and trade is well governed. This is a political question. All data institutions, to my mind, are inherently political. To shape how data is governed, to work to change how that governance operates, or to control the means of access to information is political and embeds or can challenge who has power. So open ownership is political in two ways. Firstly, that we contend that all governments should ensure the system at large is robust and that the glaring loopholes contained within it are eradicated. There are many people in positions of power who benefit from these gaps. That's where the corruption comes from, these loopholes. Secondly, we're political because we work within a space where there is a giant industry that is grown up around creating proprietary, sometimes dubious quality data about companies and their owners. And it's these businesses which supply to the due diligence industry. Arguing that states, governments should step into that space and create their own verified data, which is published well and for free, inherently challenges profitable elements of multi-billion dollar companies. So the very reform we argue for has the potential to upset a lot of powerful people. How can we hope to be sustainable in that context, and where is the money going to come from? This is a question I deal with for most of my waking existence, and even more so during a global recession of unheard of proportions. To date, we have been backed mostly by the UK government, who support our position, and that has meant UK government support primarily from the aid budget to go and do this work on implementation in eligible countries. That isn't really sustainability, it's aid dependence. To my mind, the only long-term sustainable approach to this particular type of work, which once complete means in theory that we don't need to exist anymore, has to come from actually offering a service that's in demand. And right now, that's the technical support to reform effectively. Increasingly then, I see our work much more as being part of a sort of government technology or GovTech community than anything else, as we support governments to do all the work from legislation to technical tooling and business process change that's required to do this. I would be delighted if I felt confident the international market and systems integration for government was good and could be relied upon to do this well, but frankly, it isn't. Unless the political will is there to push for effective reform, the providers of technical services to government will continue to deliver what their clients ask for. To that end, we're trying to both make sure the ask is the correct one and that the market can be in place to deliver against that well. This is why I think we're both hard to pin down. We're campaigning for reform, but we're also attempting to create the market for our services. But the real long-term goal in all of this is to ensure that the global system of norms, international law and standard setting makes it less and less viable for states to continue to harbour anonymous companies. As I think about the momentum that we do have around this kind of reform, and the pandemic that we're living through is only making that faster, for example, 31 countries receiving rapid financial support from the International Monetary Fund to respond to COVID have committed to some form of beneficial ownership disclosure in how that money is dispersed. For too long, many countries around the world could ill afford the losses they suffered from money illegally or dubiously leaving their states. In a deep global recession with ever increasing costs for government, ensuring this risk is countered becomes ever more important. Similarly, we've seen in the relentless barrage of stories about poor public procurement during this pandemic that shell companies and the complexity that sits behind them in the global supply chain of something like medical devices or PPE can be extremely damaging. Without proper visibility of who a company really is, who owns them, and an inability to do basic due diligence rapidly in a market of constrained supply is proving extraordinarily challenging. Having better data on who owns a company in the first place is a fundamental part of buying well. We must ensure that everyone can access information on this rapidly, at low cost, and confidently trust its veracity. So I'll end with 3 points. I think firstly, all of us must properly see our work as political. Our choices are political. Our work will likely disadvantage incumbents. But we have power too, and we're trying to shape a new economy where control and access to information is becoming ever more lucrative, and power is shifting to those who control the means of production for this information. That's extremely complex for us to be working in. Second, to be sustainable, I can only really see a couple of ways forward. Number one, become the monopoly yourself and ensure the state regulates to back that monopoly. Or two, do the hard yards on developing the technical solutions and sell those into a market you're advancing the creation of. Create the demand and be the supplier of the expertise to deliver. Finally, focus relentlessly on the policy change and engage with policy debate effectively. A data standard is a manifestation of policy. It delivers it. Engage with all the aspects of this, good and bad, and what policy change you're proposing. Own the downsides. Someone somewhere will probably always lose out when something changes. Don't ignore that. Tackle it head on and be confident that the policy choice is the right one, not just because we believe it to be true or want it to be true, so not just normatively, but because it is a tool for delivering the wider hopes and aspirations of a government or its people. Again, thank you for your time and thank you for having me.
Lots of food for thought there from Thom. Next up, we have a talk by Dr. Rishi Caleyachetty from UK Biobank.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here and to give a presentation on behalf of the UK Biobank. I'm going to give a short presentation about the UK Biobank as an example of a data institution that is both trustworthy and sustainable. My name is Dr. Rishi Caleyachetty, and I'm the group leader in epidemiology for the UK Biobank. I'm based at the Big Data Institute, Nuffield Department of Population Health at the University of Oxford. I'm sure you already know this, but there is no universally agreed definition of a biobank. But we can go as far as saying that it is a collection of biological samples that have been taken for the purpose of research. Biobanks are large-scale resources that link biological with health or other data. Biobanking sits at the intersection of several research disciplines and involves many types of actors, including research participants, researchers, management and technical staff, policymakers, and funders. The UK Biobank is a major resource that can support a diverse range of research intended to improve the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of illness and the promotion of health throughout society. As you can see from the diagram, a vast amount of data was collected at recruitment, and the UK Biobank continues to collect extensive data directly from participants. You've probably heard of the UK Biobank in the news recently. The UK Biobank has continued to be enhanced by converting the data collected into information that can be widely shared. Recently, considerable efforts have been spent in linking the UK Biobank to electronic datasets, including death and cancer registries and primary and secondary care records. And even more recently, the UK Biobank implemented a dynamic linkage of COVID-19 test results from Public Health England's second-generation surveillance system. I'm sure you'll understand that this is a really important topic, but financial support for core UK Biobank resource is predominantly from the Medical Research Council and Wellcome Trust, and that's essential. UK Biobank's Board of Directors, which is accountable to the Medical Research Council and Wellcome Trust, act as charity trustees under UK charity law and company directors under UK company law and exercise management oversight over the UK Biobank. The UK Biobank serves as the legal custodian of the data and samples and operates through a coordinating centre hosted by the University of Manchester. An independent ethics and governance council advises the board and funders. They also publish public reports on the conformance of UK Biobank to an ethics and governance framework, and also to the interests of participants and the public. So the UK Biobank was set up in 2006, and a lot of preparatory work was initiated well before then. But there was one clear principle when it was set up. It was set up on the basis of a clear intention for its core funders as an open access resource with the aim to make data as widely available as possible with an equitable and transparent access policy. Not many biobanks can say that they do this. All applicants are treated the same, whether it's coming from an academic source, governmental, charitable, or commercial, or whether from domestic or international organizations. All applications are assessed according to the same consistent criteria. All applications are discussed and approved by the Access Subcommittee of the UK Biobank Board. The review by the committee seeks only to ensure that the research is viable and meets the requirements. They also make strategic decisions, particularly regarding contentious matters and the use of biological samples. Sometimes, if required, ethical advice is provided to the committee by an independent consultancy group. All researchers who do end up using the UK Biobank have to provide lay summaries, and those lay summaries are published on the website. All researchers must publish or otherwise make publicly available the findings of their research and return any derived data fields and the methods to generate them back to the UK Biobank. I'm sure all of those who are aware of biobanking and the efforts to both initiate and sustain a biobank, sustainability is a major aspect that has to be explored. Biobanks need to be funded for decades, with rising costs, including personnel, equipment, and sample storage, to name a few. The costs are not always fully definable, as you can appreciate, and the financial management system needs to evolve over time. While I mentioned that the UK Biobank has been primarily funded by medical charities, the UK Biobank does also implement a cost recovery system to cover expenses of managing the access application process. But fees are reduced for research groups from low to middle income countries and for student projects. Finally, I hope that we can all agree that biobanks have a great potential for biomedical research, but in order for that to be fulfilled, trust is essential. Trust is essential for the success of biobank research because we are totally dependent on voluntary participation of the individuals invited. Erosion of that trust threatens to disrupt recruitment of new participants and make people already enrolled decide not to participate further, or worse, to leave the biobank altogether. So trust is vital. Thank you for listening to this presentation. You can find me on Twitter or feel free to email me. And lastly, I wanted to give special thanks to all the UK Biobank participants and UK Biobank staff.
Thank you very much to Rishi. Our final lightning talk now before lunch is by Matt Prewitt from RadicalxChange Foundation.
Hi, my name is Matt Prewitt, and in this very short talk, I'm going to say a few words about reimagining the data economy. By way of introduction, my background is as an antitrust lawyer, so throughout my career, I've primarily been concerned with sort of identifying power concentrations and trying to rebalance them. And what I've been working on for the past 2 years is running RadicalxChange Foundation, along with my colleague Jennifer Marone and our founder Glenn Weil. So RadicalxChange is a global movement committed to advancing plurality, equality, community, and decentralization by rigorously reimagining democracy, markets, property, and more. What that means concretely is that we develop and advance and organize community around interesting ideas for reforming and improving the way that voting works, improving the way that public goods are financed and supported, improving the efficiency of common property systems, and things like that. We build community around this. So if you're interested in meeting, finding out more about what we're up to and meeting like-minded people, get involved. For the past more than a year now, so since roughly the beginning of last summer, one of our major projects has been what we call the Data Freedom Act. What this is basically we look at the dysfunction of the data economy as one of the most important issues of our time, one of the central challenges really for our generation. And we've taken a very earnest look at how we can make this better, what a better policy would look like, what a better scheme for regulating the data economy might look like. So this has taken the form of organizing a working group with a couple dozen people, from entrepreneurs to data scientists to artists, people from many different fields, all kind of putting their heads together to think about what a more rational scheme of data regulation would look like. The result is this working document, which summarizes some of our ideas and also includes an attempt at writing a putative piece of legislation, which kind of imposes upon us the discipline of thinking about what a real policy could actually look like in detail that would affect the sort of vision that we have for a better, fairer data economy. So a few premises behind our work, some of the fundamental things to understand here are, first, that we think legitimate interests in data go beyond privacy. It includes privacy, but it also includes things like financial interests and control interests. Control interests are things like your legitimate desire to have some say about where your information is used. You may not want your data to support causes that you don't believe in, that sort of thing. Now, for example, a labor market, you can simply withhold your labor from a company whose work that you don't believe in. But in the data economy, we've completely lost control over what we are supporting through our data. We think this is an important example of these other species of interests that aren't being contemplated enough. Second, there are benefits both to shielding and sharing information. So obviously, in the status quo, people's interests and people's rights are not being protected in the way that they should be. By the same token, or on the other side of the coin, it's important to understand data as potentially an incredibly valuable public good, something that leads to increasing returns processes for many different sectors of society. It's really important to consider both of these, consider the problem from both of these perspectives to come up with a rational policy. And maybe most important of all is that we see data as not just a personal thing, but an interpersonal thing. So let me say a word about that. This may be old hat to some of you, but I really think that it's one of the most important insights to laying the groundwork for a more reasonable data policy. So conventionally, many people think of data as belonging to the individual. We think of either the data as our data, or we think of our rights to the data as strictly individual rights. The problem is that really doesn't map onto reality. The fact about information itself is that it always pertains to multiple people. So if I have a text message conversation with you, it's in my data set, but it's also in your data set. It's the same conversation. It's really one piece of information with two copies. And my right to disclose that information to a third party infringes your right to keep it private. If we look at things as, if we look at rights as held strictly by individuals, what we need to do is start contemplating data as a shared good over which we have shared interests. Whether you look at it from a rights perspective or from a market perspective, this problem appears in the same way. So data markets fail when we take our information to market on an individual basis. The reason for that is that when we go to a third party and try to exchange our data for services or sell our data or whatever we may be doing, the only thing we can really bring to market effectively is this sliver of information which is unique to us, information that that other party hasn't obtained already from someone else that they're working with, someone else in our social graph who has already disclosed information about us. So we really aren't working with our entire data set when we try to bargain over it. However, it turns out that really the most valuable information of all is the information right in the center of that Venn diagram, information that comes from and pertains to multiple people. This is the information that we have the most trouble bargaining over, but it's also the most valuable information because it's by combining insights from many people that we are able to get, make the most, for better or worse, the richest and most predictive predictions about what people are going to do in the future, about what people's preferences are, about what sort of person they are, and things like that. So a quick example of this is, for example, Netflix watching history. So I might think that my Netflix watching history is purely personal data, that it pertains only to me, but it turns out to be very predictive about what my friends are going to be likely to watch. If you combine my information with my friends' Netflix watching histories, right now you start to get a really, really rich idea about what other people in our social graph are going to enjoy watching, which means that you have power over them. You can sort of manipulate what they end up seeing, and you can predict what they're going to do in the future. So in the current bargaining situation, these richest pockets of data, the value in them is being captured exclusively by platforms and not inuring to individuals. So where we are now is we are imagining ourselves in this situation of each having our own data and bringing it to third parties that are in this, or counterparties that are in this one-to-many situation. Where we need to be is pooling our data with data coalitions or data cooperatives or data trusts or whatever you want to call them, representing our interests as collective bargaining entities vis-a-vis data buyers. So it's really only by aggregating our bargaining power that we are going to be able to get favorable outcomes in a market or effectively protect our non-financial interests and rights. So our vision is actually quite similar to Sylvie Delacroix and Neil Lawrence's vision about data trusts, which you may hear more about today. A couple distinctions, a couple of things that I think we bring to the table that bring to the conversation that are important. One is we're really agnostic between the term coalition, co-op, data union, data trust. The bottom line is that these things are collective bargaining entities. And we think that a regulatory change is needed in order to make these kinds of collective bargaining entities necessary counterparties in the data marketplace. One other really important point that we've done some serious thinking about is how to resolve the kinds of conflicts that are going to arise between these collective bargaining entities, between data coalitions. In the same way that that individuals are in a position to undermine one another's interests from a financial point of view or from a rights point of view, data coalitions or data trusts are in a position to undermine one another's interests. So what we really need is an overarching scheme that sets rules about how these different data coalitions can make claims against one another if conflicts arise, or to avoid conflicts happening in the first place by making decisions together through sort of democratic processes that involve their joint membership. We think that this is not a problem that we can sort of put off, not a can that we can kick down the road. It's very likely that as soon as we group our data together into data trusts or data coalitions, the potential for some data coalitions to undermine the interests of others in a sort of race to the bottom is going to very quickly become evident. So it's important to think about a legal scheme that that allows them to resolve disputes between each other. That's all I have time for. Thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about the Data Freedom Act and a little bit more detail about our thinking there, you can read the working paper at radicalxchange.org/file/dfa.pdf. We're also hard at work on revising to version 2, and we would love the help of the many brilliant people who are watching this. So reach out to Matt at radicalxchange.org if you'd like to get in touch and swap ideas and potentially get involved in our research and our advocacy. Thank you very much.